Emma Callahan stood outside Orlando Memorial Hospital with her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her denim jacket, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut as if the building itself was breathing. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early October, the kind of Florida day where the heat hadn't gotten the memo about autumn, and sweat was already beading along her hairline, though she'd only been standing there 4 minutes. She checked her phone again. Her mother's nurse had texted 20 minutes ago. "She's asking about you again, and about him. You know who I mean." Emma did know. Her mother, Diane, had been asking about a boyfriend for 6 months now, ever since the diagnosis. Stage 3, they'd said, then stage 4 3 months later. The cancer had moved faster than any of the doctors expected, faster than Emma's ability to process it, faster than her ability to keep lying convincingly about why she was still single at 31. With no man in sight, the lie had started small. A slip, really. Back in April, sitting in a sterile waiting room in Tampa, her mother had asked, apropos of nothing, whether Emma was seeing anyone, and Emma, exhausted, terrified, desperate to give her mother something good to hold on to while chemo dripped into her veins, had said yes. She hadn't meant to. It had just come out, soft and automatic like a reflex. His name is Jonah. He works construction. He's kind. Her mother's face had lit up in a way Emma hadn't seen in months. And after that, the lie became load-bearing. She couldn't take it back without breaking. Something in her mother that medicine already couldn't fix. Now Diane was asking to meet him. Today. This afternoon. In fact, during visiting hours, because the doctors had mentioned quietly, carefully, in the hallway where they thought Emma couldn't hear through the door crack, that they should let family visit more, should let her see the people she loved, should let her feel like her life was still happening around her, which meant Emma needed a boyfriend named Jonah in the next 20 minutes, or her mother's last good weeks would be spent grieving. A lie on top of everything else. She was still staring at her phone, rereading the nurse's text as if it might change, when a man nearly knocked into her, arms full of a cardboard box, muttering an apology before he even looked up. Sorry, he caught himself, adjusted the box against his hip, and glanced at her properly for the first time. He had dark hair, a few days of stubble, and the kind of solid, weathered build that suggested he worked with his hands. A visitor badge dangled from his shirt pocket. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I need a boyfriend, Emma blurted, and then immediately wanted to sink into the pavement. The man blinked. That's a bold opening line. No, I mean, she pressed her palms to her eyes for a second, breathing through the humiliation. I'm sorry. I don't mean it like that. My mom is dying, upstairs, right now. And I told her 6 months ago that I had a boyfriend named Jonah, and she wants to meet him today. In like 15 minutes. And I don't have a boyfriend named Jonah, or otherwise. And I am asking a complete stranger in a hospital parking lot to pretend to be him, which I recognize is insane. And you can absolutely say no and walk away, and I will never mention this again. He didn't say anything for a moment. Somewhere behind them, an ambulance chirped once as it pulled into the emergency bay. The man shifted the box in his arms. She could see now it said, Fragile Medical Equipment, on the side, and studied her face like he was trying to figure out if this was a prank. What's your name? He finally asked. Emma Callahan. I'm Frank Delaney. He paused. Not Jonah, though, so we've got a problem already. Emma let out a laugh that came out closer to a sob. You'd really consider this? Frank looked toward the hospital doors, then back at her, and something in his expression softened in a way she couldn't quite name. Not pity exactly, but something closer to recognition. My mother died 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. I know what these last months look like. I know what it's like to want to give her something good even if it costs you something. He shrugged. Like it wasn't a big deal, though they both knew it was. I'm dropping off equipment for my sister who works on the oncology floor. I've got 15 minutes to kill anyway. Might as well be your boyfriend Jonah. Frank, she said. I'll answer to Jonah for an hour. Consider it a donation to the cause. He held up the box slightly. Let me drop this off first. Then let's go meet your mom. Emma didn't cry, but it was close. Why would you do this for a stranger? Because somebody probably should have done something like this for me, back when I needed it, Frank said simply, and started walking toward the entrance before she could respond. The next hour blurred together in Emma's memory afterward into a series of small, terrifying, tender moments. Frank, Jonah, holding her hand in the elevator, asking her under his breath what her mother's favorite flowers were. Daisies, it turned out, and there happened to be a gift shop on the second floor. Frank crouching by Diane's hospital bed, taking her frail, spotted hand in both of his and saying, Mrs. Callahan, I've heard so much about you, in a voice so warm and unhurried that Emma almost believed the lie herself. Frank listening, actually listening as Diane recounted, between labored breaths, the story of how she'd met Emma's father at a diner in 1987, how he'd left his hat behind on purpose so he'd have an excuse to come back. "Emma tells me you're in construction," Diane said, her eyes bright despite the gray pallor of her skin, the tubes taped along the back of her hand. "Residential, mostly," Frank said smoothly. "Kitchens, additions. I like the work you can see finished at the end of the day." "That's important," Diane said, seeing things finished. Her gaze drifted to Emma, and something knowing passed over her face. Quick as a cloud shadow, there and gone. "You take care of my girl. She works too hard. Doesn't let people in." "I'm working on that," Frank said, and glanced at Emma with an expression that made her chest ache in a way she didn't have a name for. They stayed 40 minutes. When they left, Diane had color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in days, and the nurse pulled Emma aside in the hallway to whisper that she hadn't seen Diane that animated in weeks. Outside in the parking garage, Emma finally let herself fall apart. Not sobbing, just a long, shaking exhale. Her back against a concrete pillar, her hands over her face. "Hey." Frank's voice was gentle. "Hey, you did good in there." "You did good," Emma corrected. "I just told a lie for 6 months and forced a stranger into finishing it." "You gave your mother a good afternoon," Frank said. "That's not nothing. That's not small." Emma looked up at him, mascara probably smudged, feeling raw and exposed in a way she hadn't in years. "I don't even know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to," Frank said. But then after a pause, almost sheepish, "Though if you wanted to get coffee sometime and tell me the rest of the story, the real one, not the Jonah version, I wouldn't say no." That was how it started. Not a lie anymore, but something real growing in the space the lie had cleared. "He's good for you," Diane whispered. 3 days before she died, her voice thin as paper. "I can tell. A mother knows." "I know, Mom," Emma said, and for the first time it wasn't a lie at all. Diane passed on a Sunday morning in late November, with Emma on one side of the bed and Frank, no longer performing anything, simply present on the other. There was no dramatic last gasp, no movie-perfect final words, just a slow exhale that didn't come again, and a stillness that filled the room like water rising. The funeral was small. Diane hadn't wanted a spectacle. Frank stood beside Emma the entire day, not as a prop, not as a character, but as the man he'd actually become to her over 8 weeks, that had reshaped both their lives. Afterward, at the reception in the church basement, an old family friend cornered Emma near the coffee urn and said, "Your mother talked about Jonah so much these past months. I'm glad she got to see you happy before she went." Emma glanced at Frank across the room, laughing quietly with her cousin, looking as natural in her family's orbit as if he'd always belonged there. "His name's actually Frank," she said, smiling despite the ache in her chest. "But yeah, she got to see me happy. That part was true." Winter came and went. Spring arrived early in Orlando the way it always did. The azaleas blooming along the hospital's front walkway where Emma still sometimes walked, not out of any need but out of a strange, tender nostalgia. It was the place, after all, where everything had started, where a lie born of desperation had accidentally become the truest thing in her life. In April, exactly 1 year after, Emma had first told her mother about a boyfriend who didn't exist. Frank took her back to that same stretch of sidewalk outside Orlando Memorial. He didn't say much beforehand, just asked her to come with him. Said there was somewhere he wanted to stand. "This is the spot," he said. When they reached it, the same patch of pavement, where he'd nearly knocked her over, with a box of medical equipment. "I remember," Emma said, smiling. "You called my opening line bold." It was bold. Frank took her hand, and then, without ceremony, without an audience, he got down on one knee, right there on the sidewalk where strangers walked past pretending not to notice. "Emma Callahan, I've been Jonah, and I've been Frank. But I only ever want to be one thing to you going forward, and that's your husband if you'll have me. Your mother saw something in me before I even understood it myself. I think it's time. I stopped borrowing another man's name and just asked you as myself." Emma laughed, cried, and said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. Right there on the sidewalk where a whispered lie had somehow, impossibly, grown into the realest love either of them had ever known. They married the following spring, in a small backyard ceremony under a canopy of string lights. Daisies woven through every centerpiece in quiet, tribute to a woman who never got to see the wedding but who, in her own way, had made it possible. Emma kept one framed photo on the mantel afterward, not of the wedding, but of that first day in the hospital room. Frank crouched by Diane's bed, holding her hand like he'd known her for years instead of minutes. Some lies, Emma came to believe, weren't really lies at all. Some were just the truth arriving a little early, dressed up in borrowed clothes, waiting patiently for the rest of the world to catch up.